Lee Junyoung's refusal didn't upset Xionggu. Instead, Xionggu appreciated his honesty and offered assistance whenever Lee Junyoung needed it. The story continued with Lee Junyoung and Xionggu discussing various matters. Xionggu expressed his willingness to help, even though they had just met, as their bond felt as strong as that of brothers. The next day, Lee Junyoung attended the tutorial pass exam, which was happening today. The exam was going to take place inside the gate, but beginners didn't need to worry. As a rank B hunter, they would guide everyone together. Without any delay, they started the trial by entering the gate. Inside, they were surprised by the unusual humidity caused by the high magic density in the game. Their leader led the beginners down the path, and when they encountered goblin monsters, the chief gave them careful instructions. He warned the rookies not to be careless and to attack with caution. Then it was Lee Junyoung's turn to receive attack instructions. With lightning speed and a spear in hand, he swiftly split a goblin in two with a single move. His speed and skill left all the beginners in awe, and the chief couldn't help but think that Lee Junyoung's strength was close to a B rank. After this trial, the chief had every intention of recruiting him. Finally, they reached the boss dungeon area. The chief asked all the beginners to prepare potions and all their equipment to face the dungeon boss at their full strength. Meanwhile, Lee Junyoung pondered the Demon King, who had player-like abilities. Even before they could test that power, the 12 heroes had defeated the Demon King. But if the Demon King grew stronger than them, such an incident might not happen again. Lee Junyoung was determined to use all his knowledge to become strong and potentially change the course of events. As they entered the boss dungeon area, everyone was surprised by the increase in the level of difficulty. They felt a little worried about what kind of boss they would be facing. Then, the chief instructed all the newbies to get out of the way. From the front, a massive fire magic attack loomed, ready to strike them. Of course, the chief couldn't avoid it, so he tried to block the fire magic with his Viper's Fang skill. Even though the chief managed to block the attack, a few flames sneaked past him, surprising everyone. Lee Junyoung quickly stepped in to stop the remaining flames. All the beginners were safe now. Then, a message popped up from a sponsor named Sky of Apocalypse. They asked Lee Junyoung to take on the Goblin Archmage boss in the dungeon. This goblin was special because it had long-range fire magic. Lee Junyoung was the only one who could face it. Different from the rest, he received a challenge from the sponsor. He immediately requested the leader to give him this boss, since it was his wish. The chief couldn't say no to an assassination mission. Lee Junyoung stayed alert and analyzed his opponent's moves. Suddenly, 3 high-level fire magic attacks came from the front, but Lee Junyoung smiled as he raised his shield. Surprisingly, the fire was absorbed into his body. Finding a gap, Lee Junyoung charged forward but was blocked by a barrier. Even though he couldn't advance, Lee Junyoung had another trick up his sleeve to take on the huge flame. He raised his spear and said, "Split!" Instantly, a fiery aura on his spear split the goblin barricade. John charged forward at breakneck speed and with his fiery spear stabbed the Archmage until it was defeated. Mission accomplished. The sponsor was impressed with Lee Junyoung's performance, thanks to the support from the Sky of Apocalypse. After the exam ended, Lee Junyoung's accomplishments were reported to the association's chairman. They saw him as a talented super rookie with great potential, perfect for the chairman's plans. Meanwhile, as Lee Junyoung left the building, he was approached by Kim and Xionggu. Xionggu asked if any guild had recruited him. Lee Junyoung replied that he had been recruited by the chief during yesterday's examination but had turned it down. The reason he avoided joining any guild was that he wanted to keep his identity hidden from someone in the association. Then, instead of thinking about that, Xionggun treated Lee Junyoung to dinner for his first success. After returning from the party, Lee Junyoung analyzed his strength by opening the start menu. It showed that Lee Junyoung's level had already reached level 11, and he had the opportunity to summon an avatar. Not many normal hunters could summon avatars, and even among the 12 heroes, only a few could do it. Curious, Lee Junyoung decided to summon his avatar. A blue aura enveloped his body, but we still don't know what Lee Junyoung's avatar looks like. Furthermore, Lee Junyoung was surprised when Miss Kim reported that he had made the headlines. However, his identity wasn't revealed. Nonetheless, Lee Junyoung immediately made a request to Kim. He wanted a dungeon prepared for him the next day. Lee Junyoung wasted no time and cleared the dungeon, even though he was alone. Monsters like goblins turned out to be quite easy to defeat. Surprisingly, in just the past few days, he had completed 4 dungeons in one go. The Sky of Apocalypse was pleased with his performance. It was no wonder, given his hard work, that Lee Junyoung leveled up. And this is where we finally learn about the avatar that Lee Junyoung had summoned earlier. It's a skull bracelet. Initially, Lee Junyoung thought its effect was to devour monster souls, but it seemed to have no effect after defeating monsters in the dungeon. Lee Junyoung asked Kim about the next dungeon, and Kim explained that all the dungeons had been rented by a guild called the North Army, which had become quite famous recently. Rumour had it that the North Army had rented up to 20 dungeons for training. Lee Junyoung inquired if the guildmaster of the North Guild was Choi Yong-sun, and Kim confirmed that it was indeed him. Before Lee Junyoung arrived, Choi had been a super rookie, but now he had formed a strong guild. This revelation left Lee Junyoung shocked, because he knew that Choi would become famous as one of the 12 heroes in the future. Choi was even nicknamed War King Gunther. In the future, Choi is a really bad person. He's willing to harm many people for his own gain. The worst thing he did was destroy half of Lee Junyoung's village. The next day, while on the road, Lee Junyoung came across two intimidating hunters and traders. He didn't want any trouble, but the delinquent guy blamed everything on him. They got into a fight, and it quickly got intense. Lee Junyoung managed to stop the first guy by throwing him backward. Then the other person pulled out a weapon that should have been banned. Lee Junyoung had had enough, so he punched the guy so hard that he passed out. Lee Junyoung asked Kim to take these two troublemakers to the association. Kim explained that they were from the Guild North Army, which meant they might retaliate. Exactly 2 days later, Lee Junyoung was called to the association. He was accused of attacking a merchant. This was because the merchant had given a statement to the association. Lee Junyoung was confused about what the middle-aged man was up to, but he stayed calm to avoid being mistaken as the culprit. During the debate at the association, things got really tense, but Lee Junyoung finally presented evidence of the actual incident, a recording he had made before going to the old man. He knew from past experiences that facts could get twisted, so he made it a habit to record everything as proof, and that's how the problem was finally resolved. Later, in front of the building, Kim and Sun-gu were already waiting for him. It wasn't long after that, a middle-aged man approached Lee Junyoung and apologized for his earlier statement. He explained that he did it because his son had been threatened by the North Army, and he had to do it to keep his son safe. Guildmaster Lee Seong-gu took responsibility for the man's son's safety. In front of Choi, his manly side emerged as he shook hands with Seong-gu, overwhelmed with emotion. Seong-gu warned Choi that if he ever bothered Lee Junyoung again, he would be his opponent. The next day, Kim received news that the North Army had resolved yesterday's problem by paying only a fine. Lee Junyoung already knew this, but he found it strange because the North Army was known for being cold and ruthless. Lee Junyoung asked Kim to keep an eye on them for any new information. The following day, in order to become stronger, Lee Junyoung asked Seong-gu to join him in a raid. He wanted to learn from Seong-gu, who had a lot of experience. Meanwhile, in the North Army's residence, Choi's younger brother Yong-soo was furious that Choi hadn't taken any action. On the other hand, a man in armour urged them to calm down and resolve their internal problems first. Going back to the raid with Lee Junyoung and Seong-gu's group, it was clear that Seong-gu's group was powerful and had a solid strategy. But what stood out the most was Seong-gu himself. His sword was covered in an aura, and he could defeat 5 monsters with a single slash. After showcasing his strength, Seong-gu encouraged Lee Junyoung to do the same. With determined eyes, Lee Junyoung moved forward, his spear glowing with a blue aura. He aimed it at the goblins surrounding them, ready to show his strength. Before we continue, let's take a moment to shout out Kaylee Charles 8182, who commented, "Nice vid man," on our Dungeon Athlete video. Thanks for commenting. In an instant, he could annihilate everything. It happened so suddenly that all the hunters watching were left astonished. They wondered how Lee Junyoung could possess such incredible power without casting any spells. Seong-gu explained to them that it wasn't a skill but an authority. After clearing the dungeon, Seong-gu made another offer to Lee Junyoung. He wanted him to join his guild, and in return, Seong-gu would make him the deputy guildmaster. But Lee Junyoung, just like before, declined the offer without revealing his reasons. Shortly after, a notification popped up on a cell phone. It stated that the Hunter Association needed 100 hunters to clear a gate. This message came from the North Army. Lee Junyoung and Seong-gu sensed it was a trap, but Lee Junyoung seemed increasingly interested in joining the mission. Meanwhile, In Chang was quite annoyed with the mission because he had no idea what the guildmaster was up to. Unexpectedly, his 2 childhood friends, Choi and Yong-soo, had changed their attitudes and were now only interested in gaining the highest positions. In Chang felt helpless as he couldn't save them from this path. In Chang received a call from Lee Junyoung, who was worried about him. In Chang agreed to meet at a designated location. When they met, In-chung immediately warned Lee Junyoung to back out of the mission, as it was a trap set by Choi. What will happen next? Find out next time by staying tuned for our future recaps. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great recaps.